Hello. Well, this is our final module lecture on Energy 101, and I'd like to do a quick wrap-up and overview today to kind of see what makes some sense out of all of these details and all of the deep dives that we've done in looking at a lot of detailed information. So I'm going to flash through a lot of it because we've seen the slides and spent a significant amount of time on them. I just want to remind us of the information that we have and try to put a wrapper on it here at the end. What are the energy issues? Why are we even interested in energy? Why is it a major issue in the news and political issue and world issue? Well, in the U.S., it's for two reasons. Number one, carbon emissions, and number two, oil dependence, where we're dependent upon oil produced outside the U.S. that we have to buy at about $1 billion a year going out of this country. And so those are the two primary issues. There's some other smaller issues. For instance, the smog issue due to nitric oxides and hydrocarbon emissions from power plants and from automobiles. We've made a lot of headway on that, and I won't say it's solved, but having lived in the Los Angeles area back around 1970, it was really difficult, and you go out there now and it's a whole nother world. So in the same way in Atlanta. So we've made a lot of headway on a lot of the energy issues, but these are the two big ones that we're faced with now. Carbon emissions that is dealing with climate change and oil independence. So I just want to refocus and understand why we're looking at all this. The carbon dioxide issue, I think, is best described or best shown by this slide right here. Here's the metric tons over here, metric tons that is of carbon that's emitted each year by different countries. And notice China. This is China. And this is the U.S. The next one's the U.S. And carbon emissions are a worldwide issue. It's not like smog. Smog was a local issue and still is to some degree. It takes place in the urban areas in Los Angeles, Atlanta, New York, etc. But you go out in the country 30 miles away and it's fine. So smog was a local issue. Carbon dioxide is an international issue, world issue. When we emit carbon dioxide, it changes the climate in Europe, in Japan, in China, everywhere, and vice versa. So we have to look at not just the U.S., but everywhere. And what's frightening to me about this chart is, as you can easily see, is where China is headed. They have 3 times more people than we have. They're trying to get their population up on the economic curve and lifestyle comforts that we have. And to do that, they're having to utilize a lot of energy and produce it quickly. So all the other countries, you notice, are down here. Now, when you add all these up, they are significant, don't get me wrong. But you have to add a lot of them up to equal either the U.S. or China. And so we need everybody's help. But if we don't get the cooperation of China and do something ourselves, then we're in deep trouble. Notice that the U.S. dropped here, and that, as we noted, due to mostly the economic recession that we were in, and now the recession is coming out, it's beginning to pick back up. We have gotten more efficient, but anyway, this shows why carbon dioxide is a problem, and we need to face the facts about how we can deal with that. The second one is U.S. oil dependence, and this is best shown by this graph, which I use a lot, and this shows the the red is the oil imports, and the yellow is the U.S. oil production in the lower 48, and the magenta is the Alaska oil production. And just as we had a big increase in oil production in Alaska back here in the 80s, late 70s, we've had a big increase in oil production in the lower 48. So you notice no find lasts forever. All oil deposits are finite. There's only a finite amount of oil in the ground. Now, if we spend more money, we can get more of it out, but then it becomes an economic issue. But we've seen this kind of increase before. We saw it in the Alaska find, and that is diminishing, and 20 years later, 30 years later, you can see that we get a much smaller amount than we did back here in the heyday of the Alaska oil production. But the problem is, of course, the imports, which are represented by the red. And of course, up here is the total U.S. consumption. And we've, again, leveled off due to the economic era. So those are two charts that I think both summarize the issues that we have to deal with in carbon emissions and oil dependency. I'm going to flash through, well, this first. So what can we do to solve these issues? Number one, we've got to understand the energy system details. We can't solve a problem until we understand the details. And then we need to develop the energy technologies, and develop means commercialize them, not scientific research in the lab. We need that, and we need to continue doing that. We're doing that and need to continue and probably do more of it. But those are long-term solutions that hopefully will come to the commercial marketplace 20 years from now. And then we got to deploy the solutions. So it doesn't do any good to develop the technology if we don't deploy it. But this requires policy, and I hadn't said much about policy, but I'm going to mention it today. Because number one, why didn't I mention it? Because I'm a technologist, I'm not a policy expert. But no matter what kind of technology we develop, it's all for naught unless we deploy it, and we're not going to deploy it unless we have a policy. And that's the new takeaway from this summary. So just flashing through the energy system details that we've covered, I divided them into three categories. Number one, the society's use, what we use the energy for, where we get it from. We have to get it from a natural source somewhere, and then the process to convert it from the natural form we find it to the form that we want it to make our lives better. So we've covered all three of these boxes in different categories, but different times. But that is the sum and substance of the three parts of our energy system in the U.S. as well as most countries. And so what are the conversion process laws? Just flashing back, we have some laws that say you can't just convert one energy to another without some restrictions. The first law says that total energy cannot be created or destroyed. We talked about that. And this is called the first law of thermodynamics, just like the total mass cannot be created or destroyed. It's the exact same scenario. And the second law says that all forms of energy do not have equal value. Now, one thing I probably didn't stress, when I said equal value here, I'm not just talking about economic value, I'm talking about thermodynamic value. For instance, you can't burn coal or natural gas or oil and convert 100% of that thermal heat energy into a higher form of energy like electricity. That's what the second law tells us. And it's just a natural law, so we have to upgrade energy, upgrade some of that heat to a higher grade, like heat to electricity. We have to downgrade some of it. So that's the reason we have to throw a lot of the energy away that from combustion when we put it into a power plant to generate electricity. The analogy there is an ounce of gold has more value than an ounce of silver, not just economically, but also, in this case, thermodynamically and how we use it. So energy use, the other box is on the right-hand side is where do we use energy? It's approximately a third split. We have buildings for to heat and cool our buildings. We have manufacturing process to make the products we want, and we have transportation. So those are the three sectors we have to deal with, and we've talked about each one of those. Another major point is we cannot have economic growth of any significance without an energy increase. And the best way to decrease energy consumption and decrease CO2 emissions is to have an economic recession. And that's exactly what happened here, where we're talking about the change from one year to the other. This is the percent change in the energy consumption and the gross national product for the U.S. And you can see that the economy dropped, gross national product, and the energy consumption dropped. So when it goes up, when the economy is growing, our energy consumption is growing. And we can ameliorate that somewhat, but we're a little bit stumped as to how we can ever decouple that. Oil imports, again, is the other issue here, and this just shows the trend. We are making some headway recently due to the increased oil production and decreased oil use, and here since the recession. But it hadn't started clicking up yet. It's come up a little bit in the last several months, but not dramatically. So the trend is in the right direction, but we've seen that before. This drop was due to oil going up by a factor of 3 or 4 in price back in the late 70s, early 80s, and the U.S. power plants getting off of oil for electricity. So we saved a lot, but that was a one-time effect. So why do we need oil, since oil is the problem? Well, we use oil, so we looked at how we use oil. Transportation dominates it, with manufacturing being number 2 by a long ways back. And then one of the points that I made was that there's a confusion a lot of times regarding oil versus petroleum. And you're seeing a lot about petroleum use and imports rather than oil. But petroleum includes oil, natural gas liquids like butanes, propanes, ethanes, etc., and ethanol. And ethanol used in cars does displace oil on almost on a 1-to-1 basis, on a 1.3 to 1 basis or so. But natural gas liquids doesn't really displace oil. So we need to understand the difference there when you read something, whether they're talking about petroleum imports and independence or oil independence. There's the difference, and we talked about that. Ethanol is one that, as I said, displaces oil, not on a 1-to-1 basis, because a gallon of ethanol or a barrel of ethanol will not displace a barrel of oil because it has about 30% less energy. But there's been dramatic growth in ethanol out here, and you can see that it's gone from about 300,000 to almost 1 million up here just in the last 5 years or so, 6 years. Had a dramatic increase, but it's still it's a little over 5% of our transportation, which is where it's used. That's corn ethanol. And there's some issues with corn ethanol. It really doesn't do much for our CO2 reduction because of the energy used to produce the ethanol. And 40% of our corn grown in this country is used for ethanol, driving up the prices of food. So there's some issues with ethanol. But ethanol is a petroleum fuel, and this shows the petroleum production that includes ethanol here, natural gas liquids that come out with natural gas, and you compress them, and they're liquids, and oil. So sometimes natural gas liquids and ethanol are included as in the petroleum lump with oil, and people do that for their own purposes, basically, to try to make a point they want to make. But sometimes it's legitimate, and sometimes it's very misleading. So you just need to be aware of the difference between petroleum and oil. And regarding imports, energy independence is still about oil out here. Oil. You can see this is the energy used energy we use, the U.S. uses for in crude oil, in natural gas liquids, in coal, and in renewables. And the blue is what we produce in this country, and the magenta is what we import. And actually, if it's below zero, like our coal is, that means we're actually exporting. So we're exporting a little bit of coal and generating a lot more. But oil, you can see, this is outside the U.S. Oil is, importing about 60% of our oil, 50-60%, depending on whether you want to count North America or the U.S., and there's a lot of nuances there. You have to dig into the details. But we do import some natural gas, and that's dominantly from Canada, which is a stable source, and there's not much of it also. So we're in pretty good shape in everything but oil, is the point that we saw there. What about shale gas? Well, you see a lot of what I call hype about shale gas, and for a lot of good reasons and valid reasons, but I just want to point out this last point. That's one of my favorite things I've learned, not favorite, but one of the truisms I've learned over my long life, and that is things are rarely as good or as bad as they first appear. So shale gas initially was estimated to have a reserve of about 800 trillion cubic feet that was down there to be recovered from shale and horizontal drilling and fracking. In 2011, they all of a sudden dropped it to less than 500. Dramatic drop. And that was because the U.S.Geological Survey didn't agree with EIA's estimate of 827, and EIA admitted that the U.S.Geological Survey probably knew better than they did, and they dropped the number. So it's how much is there and what the economics will be over the long term and the environmental consequences of fracking and getting it out. It is yet to be determined, but it's a large source that hopefully we can get economically and utilize. So the conclusions on energy independence is U.S. is dependent on imported oil, but the U.S. is independent for coal and gas for all its essential purposes. So that means our electric power is coming from a fuel source that we produce, but our oil consumption, primarily in transportation, is not. And one thing we've got to realize is that this oil that we're dependent upon is we're not in control of the price. That's controlled by primarily Saudi Arabia, which dominates OPEC, and price of oil is set by the world supply and demand. So if we increase, or when we increase oil production, it does not have a significant effect on world price, because our production is still a small percentage of the world's. And if we increase production and cause the world price to go down, Saudi Arabia, some OPEC countries will decrease, and they've shown this over and over again, decrease production to offset it and keep the supply about the same. So it does make us more independent when we increase production, but it doesn't have a significant impact on the price that we pay. So the concluding point here is that regarding oil independence or energy independence is that there are no silver bullets for energy independence. We got a lot of work to do, and there are some things we can do about it, and we'll look at those further. What about carbon emissions? Well, the bottom line on carbon emissions is that if we generate solar, use solar, wind, and nuclear for electric power generation, then we will reduce carbon emissions, and because we'll be getting them from those clean carbon sources rather than coal and natural gas, in particular natural gas being cleaner than coal. Another thing we can do is higher mileage vehicles. That, thanks to policy, is in the works. We're bumping our required mileage standard on vehicles in this country up to 55 miles per gallon by 2025. And we started having mileage requirements back in the 70s when the vehicle mileage was about 12 or 13 miles per gallon. So now it's in the high 20s depending on how you count it, and we're scheduled to go to 55. That's technologically is certainly possible. Europe essentially is already there in the vehicles they have. Another option is cellulosic ethanol for transportation. That comes from things like pulpwood and trees or grasses. And so that's got a ways to go to become economically viable, however. But there's a lot of work and some commercial plants opening up. And of course, higher efficiency in electric heating and air conditioning is a primary thing that can be done that reduces our electrical consumption and thereby reduces carbon emissions. There are minimum DOE, EPA efficiency standards for space heating and equipment and air conditioning equipment, just like there are minimum efficiency requirements in miles per gallon for our vehicles, and those have made a big impact. We've moved the efficiency up with things like refrigerators and the air conditioners and the heating systems up dramatically, and lighting also. And we can even continue to improve that. There again, that's energy policy. That's a minimum efficiency standard that's set by the Department of Energy and EPA. The option, of course, is for electric generation that's clean of carbon is photovoltaics. One nice thing about these people is each homeowner, if it's on their home, owns their own power generation plant. It's difficult to have enough roof area to supply all of your power, but you can make a big dent in it. Central power towers, it has the characteristics of a central utility station, power generation station, such as a natural gas power generating plant or a coal power generating plant. But it uses the sun reflected off the mirrors and up to a central boiler, and it boils the water from the sun heat rather than from the combustion of fuels. Regarding wind and solar, there's one point I want to make here. I'm going to show you two maps. That's this one is the wind map, and this one is the solar map. Well, one point I probably didn't. I don't think I made originally when we went through this, is that the wind power density varies from region to region in the U.S. by a factor of 10. In other words, if you look out here, if you look out there, the wind density is energy density is about 10 times what it is over in here. You notice the south and the east is all green, pretty much green. The darker the green, the less there is. And so the wind energy is primarily out here from an economical collection viewpoint, generation viewpoint, is out in the Midwest. So that's why most of the wind power plants are out there. That's not true with solar. Notice for solar it's much more uniform. And here the kilowatts hours per day that falls on a fixed area is it goes only by about a factor of 2, from 4 to about 7. So it is better out here in the Southwest than you have in, for instance, the Southeast, but it's not a factor of 10 like wind energy. So there is a much more uniform opportunity for solar energy electric generation across the nation than there is wind generation. So just in summary for the U.S. energy sources, the point I want to wrap up here with this slide is that we are dominated by coal, natural gas, and oil utilization. This is the percent of our energy that we get from each of those sources. And then we've got wind over here, and we got solar over here, and we got hydro, and we got biomass. You can see we got a long way to go to replace this big chunk of energy we get from coal, natural gas, and oil that produces our carbon emissions, to replace them by our renewable and clean energy sources. This represents trillions of dollars of infrastructure, and you don't, a whole country doesn't walk away from trillions of dollars of investment and replace it with trillions of dollars worth of energy conversion processes and equipment that uses the renewable energy. It can be done, but there's huge economic penalty to pay. When the U.S. in the economic situation that they're in and debt, that's debatable whether we have the will or the financial resources to make that happen. So again, the U.S. energy issues are carbon emissions and oil dependence. And the one thing I want to emphasize here on this final wrap-up is that I haven't said much about, but I want to stress the importance of it, is that we need energy policy. We need a comprehensive energy policy. It needs to be implemented and executed, but that policy's got to be based on facts. What this course has been about is trying to talk about the facts. I'm not a policy expert, and that's the reason I've stuck with the facts, but we cannot make much headway without a comprehensive energy policy. But that policy's got to be based on facts. So much of the policy that we have is dominated by lobbyists to Congress for lobbying for different industries, and they're not interested in the national good particularly in a lot of cases, but their own industry's good. For instance, be it the nuclear industry, be it the solar industry, be it the wind industry, be it the oil industry or the coal industry, each one is up there lobbying for an energy policy that helps their industry. And that's unfortunate, because we need to understand all of this energy facts and be able to dissect the statements that are made and that we read so much of, a lot of which are misleading at best. So it's been great, and I've enjoyed being with you, and I hope that I'll see you again. Take care.